Hi, everyone. So I want to introduce Dr. Nixon to speak. She actually just left St. Joseph's University, where she was assistant to the provost for inclusion and diversity, and we're all very excited for her new position, but we all miss her very much too. So I'm just going to read her bio. Dr. Monica Nixon serves as NASPA's Assistant Vice President for Equity, Inclusion, and Social Justice. Previously, she served in student affairs and administrative leadership at St. Joseph's University, Seattle University, Colgate University, University of Puget Sound, and University of Virginia. Dr. Nixon received her MED in Counselor Education in 1999 and BA in English in 1995 from University of Virginia. In 2013, she earned an EDD in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies at the University of Washington, where her dissertation focused on the positionality of and agency of women of color chief diversity officers in higher education institutions. It is a mouthful. So, without further ado, Dr. Nixon.
Thank you, everyone. I know that you've had 3 really full, engaging days, and so, and you've probably also spent a lot of time sitting. I wish I could say that I had you doing calisthenics or something during the next 45 minutes or so, but I don't. However, at various points, I will be asking you some questions, and unless I say it's rhetorical, I actually would like feedback, okay? Okay, so I have been asked to talk about diversity and inclusion in Jesuit higher education, what I think of as the work of justice. And it's a topic I've spent a lot of the past dozen years thinking about, ever since serendipity brought me into Jesuit higher education. And that move actually, at that time in my career, it restored my faith in the potential for colleges and universities to serve as sites for liberation and imagination and optimism. I had a chance at some point in my time here at Seattle U to share with students that they really renewed my faith and made me love the work that I had the opportunity to do. And so when I think of Jesuit higher education, even though at this point we're now working for a nonprofit association, I still think of Jesuit higher education as my family. So when I say we today, I hope you'll indulge me. And when I say we, I mean us who are engaged in this work. So I want to spend some time this morning thinking with you about why this work is integral to who we actually just are as Jesuit institutions. So that's what we're going to be doing today. It's important to recognize that we're engaged in this conversation during a time of, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that we're in an era of extreme factionalism. So with people acting in ways that are primarily loyal to their own communities, right? What matters for me and mine. People actually are feeling, there's data that shows this, people are feeling more polarized from one another and more estranged from the collective than at any time in recent decades. And that's across the political spectrum. So regardless of, if your party is in office, you still feel estranged from the collective, right? And we feel this extreme sense of polarization. So I'm seeing some head nods. What are examples that you're seeing of this kind of factionalism? This is one of those non-rhetorical questions. So examples of factionalism that you're witnessing either on your campuses or in the broader society around you. Yes. Yeah, so that was a fear of speaking up for speaking your own truth because of the backlash you might receive. Yes, Dan.
At our school, we saw for the first time data that says that our students, the largest category of people feeling they've had some kind of discriminatory response to them is for their political views. Mm-hmm. And when you dug into that data, it was kids who felt, or people in our community who felt either very conservative or very liberal, both feeling, there are large groups on either end of the spectrum, both feeling like they've had discriminatory or harassing behavior toward them because of their political views.
Right. Thank you for that. And I think, again, that backs up what we're seeing, right? No matter where you are on the political spectrum, you're feeling this sense of alienation. Other examples? Yes?
There's also like an unwillingness to engage in discourse on certain topics in general.
So an unwillingness to engage. Can I ask you to dig a little bit deeper? What do you think is behind that?
Like some of the other people pointed out, the fear of getting that discriminatory response and being further alienated from what people perceive as the collective.
Okay, so that reluctance to engage in the discourse. Yes?
I also feel some of the reluctance to engage in discourse also comes from the standpoint of almost, what's the point of it anyway? It's more of it because it's like people are so polarized.
I'll repeat.
Their ideas that it's almost, it seems like an exercise in futility.
Yeah.
To try and see the other side.
Right.
It's almost,
So a sense that it doesn't even matter, right? Like, why bother to engage? Because people are so dug in that it's not going to pull anyone out of that kind of extreme position. Is that okay? Did I do an okay? Okay. Yes.
A problem where we focus more on what we differ as opposed to the common ground that we share. And that is a big problem to achieving any kind of open and honest debate.
Yeah, so the sense that we're focusing more on what separates us rather than what we have in common. I'll take one more. Yeah.
Kind of going along the same thread, the discourse often turns into demonization, and that demonization stymies any efforts of connection.
Yeah, so when we find we disagree with someone, we demonize the other side, right? So thank you so much. I think what you're naming is that's the water we're swimming in right now, right? And so when we think about doing this work of the collective, we're doing it in a time when people feel more separated, more wary, more hopeless about, how do we engage? Why should we engage? And I think one of the things that these examples have in common is a real sense of binary thinking, right? So it is, you are with me or you're not. You're with me or you're against me. We agree or we don't. And if we don't, we never will. This sense of, we don't know much about the other side. I have been in places where it's really comforting to be with people who think like me, right? There's a kind of shorthand. I don't have to explain myself. I can, I can let my guard down, maybe. But that if I only hold myself in those spaces, I am in essence contributing to this factionalism that we're all experiencing. And I think one real problem is that the challenges in our world have become too big to solve without lots of people coming together to bring different approaches, different ways of thinking, different perspectives, different experiences. If we think about climate change or wealth inequities or educational attainment gaps, right? These problems are too big to solve in a one-sided way. I'm going to forward this a little. And what we find ourselves in is this place of, if us equates with I'm right and them is wrong, then we're destroying the underpinnings that support all of us. So I heard a speaker say recently that diversity isn't rocket science. It's harder. So working toward inclusion while honoring diversity encompasses three elements that overlap and often conflict. And you all talked about some of these in just now. So factionalism, which we've spent some time thinking about. So that's one of those factors. Marginalization, right? Or the reality that some people are pushed to the margins of society or our universities by the structures and systems and patterns that make up our everyday lives. Right, so as an example, think if you're on your residence hall floor, if the common way to socialize on a Friday night is that everyone orders pizza, and then there's someone who lives on your floor who can't afford to participate in that, then that person experiences marginalization, right? They end up feeling excluded, they end up feeling like they don't belong. Right, so in this kind of situation, what could you do if you noticed that pattern of marginalization? What could you suggest? So you're living on this residence hall, everyone orders pizza every week. That's your way of socializing. What might you do if you wanted to include everyone? What's a different way to do that? Yes. Suggest socializing in a different way. What are some, you could watch Netflix, right? Sit in your lounge, watch Netflix. Get popcorn. Yeah. Interesting. You could make the pizza together. I like that. These are fun ideas. I'm going to come socialize with you all. On an institutional level, we know from data that first-generation college students, what we know is that our campus, there's a hidden curriculum in terms of how people navigate our campuses, right? We assume that students know how and where to ask for help. We assume that students know that every faculty member has a certain way that they like to receive things, right? We assume that people know that office hours are a good thing. First-generation college students who haven't been acculturated to know those norms may find it more challenging to navigate our campuses, right? So that's a kind of organizational marginalization. And there are lots of programs that have been started, many of them at Jesuit universities, first-generation college student orientation and transition and mentoring programs. On a societal level, there are lots of, I'm going to be risky here, but there are lots of benefits that accrue to people who are married, right? But the right to marry doesn't extend to all people. And some people don't actually want to be married. And so there's a structural marginalization that happens in terms of how people can or cannot access this set of benefits that we've tied to that institution. So marginalization can happen individually, it can happen organizationally, and it can happen societally. But what happens is that these patterns get kind of embedded into the systems. So we have factionalism. That's one of the, I remember I said there were three things that are competing, right? So factionalism, marginalization, and then there's the reality of very legitimate differences that I assume we need to continue to honor. So, such as differing religious ideologies, right? To ask someone who's a part of a group to give up something that is deeply meaningful to them in order to ask them to leave that behind to be a part of the group feels like a dishonoring, right? So, but then how do we address marginalization without exacerbating factionalism, right? We heard earlier that sometimes we get into our bubbles and then the boundaries become so impermeable that we can't, that they end up separating more than they end up bringing us together. So how do we help people find those who are like them to enhance a sense of belonging without creating these impermeable boundaries that might encourage separation? How do we address factionalism without papering over marginalization? Right? If we say everyone should just set aside their differences, then we may be ignoring real distinctions in privilege and oppression. So we have to hold those things, competing tensions. And then how do we honor legitimate differences as we're addressing those other two dynamics? By the way, I wish I could tell you what to do with this conundrum. I am here to give you the answer, because then that would mean that I know how to do it. I do have strategies, and I've worked in communities where we have held these seemingly three competing threads in a way that actually allows us to tap into, allows us to bring ourselves together in community. But how to untangle them when so much of the current climate seems to be tying these knots tighter, that's the challenge. And again, I wish I had the answer, but I don't. But I think the answer lives in conversations and communities and rooms like this. Because what we need are leaders who create space where people are more likely to cooperate. So where do we see these examples of these kinds of leaders? Now, I could have been really obvious, right? So, this is St. Ignatius, in case this is a new image for folks. I thought you might recognize him. So, I thought by day 3 of your conference, you might have touched on St. Ignatius already. So I thought I'd try a different approach. I have long been a fan of superheroes and science fiction. So in fact, the first person I really saw myself in the media when I was growing up was Spock from Star Trek. Does anyone know Spock? So yeah. Yeah, so Spock was, if you don't know, he's mixed Vulcan and human. So Vulcan father, human mother. And so he was mixed species, right? And I'm mixed race. I didn't share that. And what I loved about Spock was that his being mixed didn't show up as a pathologized thing, right? I mean, he wrestled with it. It had meaning for him, but the way the character was developed, he got to bring kind of the best of both of those experiences into his work with Starfleet. Starfleet was also about, finding new places and creating relationships. So I loved Star Trek. I've also always loved depictions of people who encounter evil or wrongdoing and who make the hard decision to meet it, right? So when others go along or don't see, science fiction, superhero movies, love them. Wonder Woman was always my favorite. I grew up as a girl in the 70s. There weren't a lot of examples of women and strong women on television. And so she was like my superhero. And I couldn't have been more excited when I learned that after years and years of attempts, she was going to have her first full-length feature movie. So not just a supporting character, not just supporting Batman and Superman, but really, so in 2017, I don't know if you saw Wonder Woman, but anyone see Wonder Woman? Oh, yeah. Okay, good. Okay. For those of you who didn't, don't worry. I'll walk you through it. Okay. So I'm going to ask you today to indulge me in considering what can we learn from Wonder Woman in the fight for justice and equity. So recognizing that not all of us grew up watching Wonder Woman or reading comic books, allow me to briefly set the stage. It is a little bit of an odd story. So Wonder Woman, her name is Diana. She's a princess. So she grew up with all women. They're actually Amazons, which has always made me a little bit uncomfortable. I think some cultural appropriation or exoticization happening here. But in any case, she grew up with all women on the island of Themyscira, which was created by the gods as a place to hide from the world until such times as the Amazons would be needed to save humankind from evil. Okay, we're all on the same page. So, okay, you're like, this is weird. Okay, so the 2017 version of Wonder Woman, evil came to Themyscira in the form of World War I and an American pilot named Steve Trevor, whose plane crashed in the ocean near the island. Diana rescues him and then learns about the outside world from which she has been totally sheltered, right? She doesn't know what's been happening in the outside world. So early on in the film, Diana has a choice about what to do with the information she's learned. So this is a quote from the movie. "What one does when faced with the truth is more difficult than you'd think." Diana's mother wants her to stay on the island where she will be safe. And at various points, Diana and her mother and the people around her, so throughout the movie, are tempted to ignore danger and threats. But Diana finds that she can't ignore oppression when she sees it, right? When she witnesses it, she can't just ignore it. One of my favorite books is called The City and the City. Has anyone read it? Hey, look at that. Okay. So keep me honest here. It's by English author China Miéville. So in the novel, this is a great novel. I read it all the time. So in the novel, two cities coexist in the same physical space. So they're totally different cities. In fact, you need a visa to get from one to the other, even though they geographically occupy the same space. So residents of both cities, as they're growing up, they learn the skill of unseeing the other city. So in essence, they consciously erase from their mind or fade into the background the people and buildings and events that are taking place in the other city, even if they're an inch away. So think about how often we actually do this to one another. When someone tells us what they're experiencing and we explain it away. Or when we hear or see someone being treated badly and we turn away. Fortunately, we can interrupt, unlike in the book, we can interrupt this form of unseeing the truth. During my years of working on campuses, I regularly found that once we started offering trainings and workshops about some dynamic related to inclusion, we would receive more reports about exclusion or bias. This was consistent across issues and communities. So everything from Title IX trainings about sexual misconduct to racial microaggression sessions to safe zone workshops about LGBTQIA inclusion. In fact, the pattern was so consistent that whenever I proposed a new program or training, I included kind of a warning to my colleagues that rather than hearing about fewer incidents, we would be likely to hear about more. We'd receive more reports. Not, of course, you all are smart people. It's not like it was happening more just because I had this workshop, but it's because we'd helped people recognize what was happening around them all along. Right? We gave them a way to name it. So naming doesn't come without risks. It can be harder than we perhaps want to believe of ourselves that we will do right when we witness something wrong. Sometimes we stumble because we want to take the perfect action. Right? I know I regularly berate myself for not having the best retort or the best way to deflect something or address it. But a good friend of mine often reminds me, we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It's good wisdom there. So this next quote is from Steve Trevor, that pilot who crash landed in the ocean. Okay, so he says, "I guess I gotta try. My father told me once, if you see something wrong happening in the world, you can either do nothing or you can do something. And I already tried nothing." So I share this quote for two reasons. First, I like the try. What you choose to do may not be perfect, but doing something counts. Again, I would love to think that when I hear a sexist joke in a meeting, that I'll speak up and say, that's inappropriate, it belittles women for these reasons, and I'd like you not to say it again. Right? There you go. I'm going to be very self-righteous when I do this. Now, I have done this before, maybe not with the self-righteous part, but more often I've either not named what I saw happening or chosen some other way to address the situation. So what I described earlier, right, something happens, I name it, I say that's not appropriate, that's an active way of intervening. And there may be reasons that this isn't a good option, right? There may be reasons of safety or belonging. And so fortunately, there are other ways to intervene. For example, you can distract. If you see someone doing something to another person, maybe you accidentally bump into them, or you ask them for directions, or you pretend to know them and interrupt what's happening, right? There are ways that you can distract in that situation in order to interrupt a dynamic that you see kind of developing. You can also take supportive action. We've already established that it can be scary, or at least I say it, for me, it can be scary to name what's happening actively. But if the person who does the naming is someone else, you can bet that offering support goes a long way to mitigate the risk of that speaking, and actually to encourage others to speak as well. A simple "I agree" or moving next to someone who has spoken up goes a long way. You can believe someone who says they've been harassed. Maybe you accompany a friend to report a situation. So these are small but very meaningful acts of solidarity. So you can actively intervene, distractively, that's not a word, and then supportively intervene. I'll need to think of another way to say that. So I like the try in this quote, right? I also like that Steve acknowledges that he tried nothing in the past. So he used to ignore it. So what we've done in the past doesn't have to be the sole determinant of what we'll do in the future. That doesn't mean our past actions don't matter. I mean, sometimes they can have a pretty significant impact, but we can reflect and learn from who we have been and make new decisions. Okay, so in the film, Diana's aunt, she's played by Robin Wright in the movie, she's awesome. So in the movie, she's named Antiope. So Diana's aunt says this to her: "You are stronger than you believe. You have greater powers than you know." Now, Diana had literal powers, superhuman strength. She could heal really fast. She could run really fast. She had near immortality. I may not have those powers. But I like to think that what this quote calls us to be is to believe in our own strength. We spoke earlier about marginalization. And one of the outcomes of marginalization is that we come to see people's differences and even our own as weaknesses we have to overcome, right? This happens a lot on our campuses. How many of you here speak more than one language fluently? Look at that. Awesome. Thank you. How many of you spoke a first language other than English? All right. So we know from neuropsychology that there are cognitive benefits to speaking more than one language. I mean, a lot of them. I did a quick search of this, and there were like 17 things. I won't name them all, but improvements in memory is an example. The ability to negotiate meaning, increases in perceptiveness, the ability to multitask and make decisions. It staves off Alzheimer's and dementia, right? These are good things. Knowing more than one language is awesome. And yet, when students for whom English is a second, or maybe third or fourth language, come to our schools and campuses, we treat this asset as something that has to be overcome. Right? We place children in speech therapy to teach them unaccented English, or maybe like, which I think like speak from, like you're from Ohio or something. So students try not to get put in the same group as the international student in their class, right? Because, oh, it's going to be too hard to understand this person. Rather than seeing, holy cow, this person learns in multiple languages. I totally want that person on my team. So have you seen this happen? Yeah. So I want you to understand that what makes you different makes you strong, right? What you bring, what is distinctive, is something that you contribute in the circles you interact in that no one else can. Especially when, in order to succeed, you've had to navigate systems and structures that have not been designed with you in mind. And recognize also that you have an opportunity as a leader to help others believe in themselves. In the film, Diana and Steve put together kind of an uncommon team. People who may not have been welcomed on other teams, right? They've messed up in some way, and so they've been kind of ostracized. Or people who may not understand exactly what they're contributing. But one of the most important things you can do as a leader is to invite others to be the best versions of themselves, to understand that they're stronger than they may believe. You know, I can think of, I'm invited sometimes to think about meaningful moments in my own journey, and they almost always involve a mentor or a faculty member or a friend who has pushed me in some way, who has encouraged me in some way that I didn't think that I was initially capable of. Right? So when we hold those moments and realize, okay, like I can do that for other people, that's one of those key things you can do to bring people in who have not felt included. So I hope you understand your influence in creating a sense of belonging for your peers, in helping people understand that they're not alone and that they matter. So in our final lesson from Wonder Woman, for this morning, you can learn multiple lessons if you want to watch this movie. But it's important to know why you're in the work of social justice. So here Wonder Woman says, I used to want to save the world, to end war and bring peace to mankind. But then I glimpsed the darkness that lives within their light. And I learned that inside every one of them, there will always be both. A choice each must make for themselves. Something no hero will ever defeat. And now I know that only love can truly save the world. So I stay, I fight, and I give for the world I know can be. So I believe that the overall message, what I took from Wonder Woman, is less about defeating evil and more about choosing love. We all have light and dark in us, right? It's what contributes to this. I mean, it's one of the dynamics that contributes to this sense of factionalism. I've heard Eboo Patel, the founder of Interfaith Youth Corps, say, he said this in a talk at St. Joe's, actually, there is a totalitarian regime in me. So we all have the ability to, kind of be the totalitarian person in my life, right? To say like, no, you have to be this way to be around me. In order to be included in this community, you must behave in these ways. So let me be totally honest here for a bit, and not speaking from my role or the need to balance lots of perspectives, but I spent a lot of the Brett Kavanaugh hearing alternating between rage and despair. I thought really quite terrible and judgmental things about a lot of the people in the hearing. I even made some of it about me, right? Like, it's all about me. That the confirmation process had made a liar out of me when I said to survivors of sexual assault that it's getting safer to report, that people will believe you, that we will care for you, right? So I spent, again, a lot of that week really in this kind of low place. And for my job, I was asked to write something to, kind of situate what was happening for our members. And I thought, I'm not the right person to do this. I'm not in the right place to do this. But the process of writing and reflecting, which was kind of a journaling for me, it went through a lot of versions. And I think what we ended up publishing felt truer, right? I could name that despair and also think about how can I make meaning of this? How can I choose differently? I actually used to stoke this anger, right? This righteousness, because it gave me energy in fighting oppression. But somewhere along the way, I realized that the fire would burn me up a lot faster than it burned up injustice. Anger consumes as it goes. And I found that in order to sustain my drive, I needed a more generative form of energy that came from creating, right? Diana here talks about staying and giving for the world I know can be, right? So I know I'm a part of creating something different. And as I mentioned earlier, it really was Jesuit higher education that helped me understand this about myself. Before I came to SU, I used to say that I did anti-oppression work. And now I say that I engage in the work of liberation and movement building. The Ignatian mission really helped me to recognize that love is resistance. It's what inspired St. Ignatius, who I did not realize was right here next to me. And it's certainly what inspired Christ. So what have we learned from Wonder Woman? That it may be difficult to do the right thing when we encounter injustice, but that we can commit to trying, and that you're stronger than you believe, and that choosing love is revolutionary. See, why wouldn't you want to watch this movie, right? You're going to go out and rent it. Okay. So what does this have to do with your role as leaders in Jesuit institutions and as members of Alpha Sigma Nu? Everything, of course, right? So the service of faith and the promotion of justice. I'm sure you've seen this before. Does anyone know where this phrase, if you're a Jesuit, don't answer this question. Does anyone know where this phrase first appeared in the Jesuit canon? I'm just getting a drink right now. Okay. So, how about if you are a Jesuit, you can answer this question. Yes, Kate. It was actually in General Congregation 32, right? So, which he does reference, yes, in his remarks in 2000, right? That's, the Santa Clara Commitment to Justice Conference, 20th anniversary happening in 2020 at Georgetown University. So, General Congregation 32 took place from December 1974 to March 1975. So, this has been a long time, right? The Jesuits really set out a new direction for the society in this General Congregation. The overriding purpose of the Society of Jesus was the service of faith, but they added the promotion of justice. This new direction wasn't confined to those who were already working with the poor and the marginalized, the social apostolate, but rather this commitment was to become what the decree says is the integrating factor of all of the society's works. The commitment was reaffirmed in General Congregation 34 in 1995, so 20 years later, which was truly courageous, considering that in the intervening 2 decades, many people had paid for this mission with their lives. So this mission of justice is not one to take lightly, right? It was a conscious decision by the society to have all of the works of the society engaged in this, in both the service of faith and the promotion of justice. I want to come back to where love fits in here with words from Decree 2 from General Congregation 32. The way to faith and the way to justice are inseparable ways. It is up this divided road, this steep road, that the pilgrim church must travel and toil. Faith and justice are undivided in the gospel, which teaches that faith makes its power felt through love. They cannot therefore be divided in our purpose, our action, our life. So faith makes its power felt through love. So as members of Alpha Sigma Nu, we see in you the best of the Ignatian call to be people with and for others. So I'm going to leave you with 4 questions today. So what are you building? Right? What issues do you care about? How do your actions both dismantle and also create? What will sustain you? What do you bring? What unique combination of experiences, knowledge, and skills do you contribute? What is your sphere of influence? Are there tables where you sit that others aren't able to access yet? And if so, how will you use that privilege? How will you bring more seats to the table or build a bigger table? So, what do you bring? Who will you include? At the risk of belaboring my metaphor this morning, I might say that the Jesuits are like the Justice League, right? So superheroes recognize they can't do everything on their own, and so did the Jesuits. You need companions, right? So who will you include? In what unexpected places will you look for wisdom? How will you avoid recreating a new kind of factionalism that comes with if you only include people who think like you do? How do you create places for people to make mistakes and to learn? Right, I think I am seeing kind of a standard of political or social justice purity in different organizing communities, and I think that that is actually undoing some of the work of social justice. So how do you create space for people to make mistakes and to learn? And then what do you need to know? Right, what do you need to know in order to be engaged in change for the common good? And another way to think about this is, what do you think you know but don't actually know? Right, I have lots of those things in my life. So earlier I said that the challenges of our world have become too big to solve without lots of people coming together and applying their talents in truly innovative ways. So we need you as leaders to create space where people are more likely to cooperate. I would like to think that earlier generations, and I include myself in this, have laid some groundwork, but unfortunately we've also left you with enormous challenges. I don't know if Father Steve told this story. Did he talk about the story of being in the class with the student who talked about the greatest generation? Oh good, I'll tell you the story then. So Father Steve said he went to a class and he had just finished reading The Greatest Generation by Tom Brokaw, where Tom Brokaw talks about the generation that kind of brought people out of World War II. And so, the greatest generation, it's a little bit self-aggrandizing perhaps. And a student in the class said, I beg to differ. This is, just about probably, 8 or 10 years ago. And the student said, I beg to differ. And he said, excuse me, and she said, I don't think that's the greatest generation. And he's like, okay. And she said, look what you've left us with. And she said, our generation needs to be the greatest generation because we literally have to save the planet. So you're not alone in this work, but you will need to lead it, right? We have left you with some pretty big challenges. Christopher Pramek, who's a theology professor at Xavier University, I quote him a lot. Does anyone know him? I've never met him. Hey, look, great. Did I say his name right?
I think so. I believe he's a Regis.
Oh, is he a Regis? Look at that. Okay, I'm going to change my remarks. Look at that. Okay. So he said, Jesuit education must open up spaces where teachers and students can dare to imagine together a transformed world, to risk even the miraculous. So I am so grateful to you for your leadership, your optimism, your creativity. It's been so fun to see friends in this space. I look forward to seeing how you transform our universities and our communities and our world. Thank you very much. Sure, yes. If you have questions, I'm happy to. Okay.
So when I first called Monica, one of the things I was thinking about is that we at Alpha Sigma Nu are automatically exclusive by definition. And because we're an honor society, that's where inclusion and diversity given our parameters. And so I was just wondering what suggestions you would have in communications we or how we ask or anything like that. It could be, for example, if Fordham sends out 200 applications to make sure that that anyone who may be a first-generation student or a student of color, and we don't hear from them, is there a reason that there's something down that?
Thanks, Kate. That's a great question. Did everyone hear Kate's question? So by its very nature, Alpha Sigma Nu is exclusive, right? Top 15% eligible, top 4% admitted, or 4% admitted. So how do we make sure that we're thinking about inclusion dynamics when we're doing our outreach, when we make our invitations? It made me think of a story. So I was at a NASPA, NASPA is the association I work for now, and I was at a conference in Philadelphia last year, and Sonia Sotomayor was speaking. So she's a justice on the Supreme Court. She went to Princeton as a first-generation college student, and she talked about, so she talked a lot about that experience. And one of the interesting things she said was, so in her senior year, she was in her room and sitting on her bed, and a really good friend of hers who had kind of helped her navigate Princeton came in the room, and they were going to go out to get lunch or something. And so her friend sat in the chair at the desk while Sonia Sotomayor was sitting at her, I can't call her just Sonia, right? So while Justice Sotomayor was sitting on her bed and putting on her shoes. So her friend happened to look into the trash can and said, "Hey, what's that? Why is that note from Phi Beta Kappa in your trash can?" And Sonia Sotomayor said, "I don't know, it's one of those honor society things, right? I'm sure they just want money, right? They just want money." And her friend said, "Is the money a challenge?" She said, "Yeah, it's like $60. And her friend said, "I will pay it for you." And Sonia Sotomayor said, "Is it a big deal?" Phi Beta Kappa, if you don't know, so Phi Beta Kappa is also an honor society. And similarly, kind of recognizes academic achievement, contributions to the community. And so, and Sonia Sotomayor said, "Well, if you think it's that important, I'll find the money for it. I just didn't know what it was." And so she accepted the invitation, paid the $60, and she said that consistently when she went in for interviews for her clerkships, every time she would see Phi Beta Kappa circled on that resume. Right, so she had this, and she would, happenstance, her friend happened to see this and, mentioned it's kind of important. So I offer that example, that we might think, like, of course Alpha Sigma Nu invited you. It says honor society. You must want to accept this invitation. And yet, people may not know what that means, right? They may not know the doors it opens. They may not know the relationships and the leadership it can provide. So I think that's one thing that you all can do, when you send these invitations out, is to really, find ways to be in front of people, to talk with them about what this means. Go to places where students are. So if you have a first-generation office, if you have an office of inclusion and diversity, right, be in those spaces to talk about what this means. So I think that's one thing. We also talked, I did a lot of the talking today, sorry. But I talked earlier about marginalization, right? That we have these structures, right? So by nature, if you only consider the top 15%, right, we already know from research and data that, if you are working multiple jobs, or if you are a first generation college student, it might take you a little bit longer to kind of get your footing on campus, that your GPA may not be as high. Right, and so again, early on, being in front of students to talk about the opportunities that are available when, so instead of, in your second, third, or fourth year, going to students and saying, as a result of all these things that you've already done, to be in front of students at the beginning of their career to talk about, when we say we want you to be successful here, it's not just, we're not just saying that. There are opportunities that will be available to you. And fortunately or unfortunately, those opportunities may be available as a result of some of the things that decisions and outcomes from very early in your college career. Yes?
Hi,
So as a person of color leader in Alpha Sigma Nu, I was wondering your thoughts on something. Do you think Jesuit institutions are reconceptualizing leadership as leaders with and for others, or are we affirming that most people of color understand leadership as a positional experience?
So are you saying that people of color think of leadership as a positional experience and haven't been invited into that reconceptualization of...
It's actually my research question. I was just considering what you might think.
Wow. I feel like you should answer this question, right? It's interesting. So I grew up, my mother is Taiwanese. I moved to the States when I was 6, and kind of raised with a large group of Chinese Americans in the area where I grew up with. And so I think of myself as fairly like a communal person, right? Like I'm my comfort zone is to make decisions with communities, to think of ideas, to not be the person who's standing up in front of you talking today. I spent a lot of nervous hours last night, kind of reframing this. And I also have had to learn how to be successful in universities that really value individual achievement, right? And so I've had to kind of hold both of these experiences. I think this is why Jesuit higher education resonates so deeply with me, is that it feels like a place where we can talk about the collective, right? Where it's embedded. I mean, we say that this is what we're about. Right? We say that we are people with and for others. And even that language has changed, right? Men for others, men and women for others. Men and women doesn't capture all of the genders that are available. So let's talk about being people with and for others, right? So how can we even in our language invite a more inclusive experience? So I want to say that sometimes when we invite people who have been minoritized into our campuses, the assumption is that they will adapt to whatever the prevailing norms are. And some of those norms still are really individualistic, right? And so I think as the more that we can do to frame leadership as collective, it actually aligns with many communities of color, right? It aligns with how we lead, how we think of ourselves in relationship with other. So I actually think that the more we can include communities of color in that conceptualization of leadership, I think it will actually deepen the ways that as Jesuit universities, we say we're about being people with and for others. I don't know if that helps or...
It does, thank you.
Okay. Again, I think you have a lot of wisdom to offer, so I hope folks during lunch and things like that what's your name?
Hannah.
Hannah. Want to follow up with Hannah to ask her more about that very good question. I think we probably have time for one more. Is that right? Okay. Yes.
So I just wanted to start off by thanking you for bringing back to the table this conversation about marginalization. It reminds me a lot of part of my thesis was on the work of Gloria Anzaldúa was at St. Peter's, and she more or less to a certain extent continues to discuss the borderlands and what that kind of rich exchange at the borderlands is for people who happen to come from mixed race identities and then mixed cultural identities, and then how they kind of all come together, but still create a marginalization even within them, right? So I'm just really grateful that you shared your perspective with us and kind of helped us think of our roles in Alpha Sigma Nu as not just ambassadors of the organization, but also ambassadors to kind of engage with those folks on our campus, those peers of ours that may feel marginalized, especially the first generation group. As a first generation student at a Jesuit institution, the resources weren't there if it wasn't for the professors, but I'm sure that if the Alpha Sigma Nu members on the campus knew it existed, that they would have been some of the first people I would have gotten a chance to speak to, right? So I'm really encouraged to have had you speak to current students as I jump on, but that it can still remain. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Congratulations on your thesis and graduation. This idea of the borderlands and this earlier question about, how do we include more, it just makes me think about how do we include more voices. So the borderlands concept, I'm so happy you talked about that, right? Because there's a lot of research around, particularly when we think about people of color, women of color, people who are in multiple ways kind of othered in the ways that our institutions and structures have been set up. And again, often when we are invited in to these communities, the idea is that you will adapt, right? You will learn to adapt to whatever the prevailing norms are. You know, that's actually not a terrible thing, right? Like, when I travel to other places, I assume that I need to adapt to what the prevailing norms are, right? It's actually pretty disrespectful if I just want to be exactly who I am in every single place that I interact. So the skill of being able to adapt is a huge strength. And there are some who have to do that literally every day, right? In every space that they occupy, in every space that they enter. So really seeing that as a strength, and the other piece around the borderlands concept is that when you are in these places, you still have your other kind of, you know, your experience, and so you can view what's happening in the community with a little bit, it's called this position of alterity, right? You can be the outsider within. And so you may notice patterns and dynamics that others don't. Right? If this has always been the water I swim in, I may not recognize that, you know, the example about the pizza, right? I, as an RA, may have created that program because I think, oh, that worked for me, right? It's really inclusive. Everyone can be a part of it. You just join in whenever. So well-meaning, and yet perhaps exclusive. So really, opening up space for people to bring that outsider within perspective, to notice dynamics that you may not be able to notice just because you haven't had to, right? So I think, thank you for bringing up the borderlands. Great. Thank you all so much. I hope the rest of your conference goes well.